Thank you for joining us here for this special occasion, Swinburne University's Barbara Dicker Oration. My name's Sophie Scott. I'm the medical reporter for ABC and I'll be your host. We appreciate your time. We know you all have very busy schedules, so we're grateful that you could be here for us. I'd like to give a special welcome to the members of the Dicker family. We'll hear from Tony Dicker soon, but the generous support of the Dicker family through the Barbara Dicker Brain Science Foundation has been crucial to the work that Swinburne is doing. And today you'll hear about some of that work in the area of dementia. Swinburne is expertly poised at the nexus between health, humanity and technology as we face new and unexpected challenges thanks to the COVID pandemic. Attention will turn to experts like those at Swinburne to highlight innovative new solutions for issues like caring for people with dementia. And you'll hear about some of the amazing work being done at Swinburne. Because of the pandemic, we're spread across Australia, but I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which Swinburne sits on. On behalf of those present, I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I also pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia. We hope the path towards reconciliation continues to be shared and embraced. Now, before I give you a quick rundown of today's events, if you're on Twitter, please tweet and include Swinburne's handle, which is @Swinburne, and the hashtag Barbara Dicker Oration. And my Twitter is Sophie Scott and the number 2. We're going to hear from the new Vice-Chancellor, Pascale and Tony Dicker from the Dicker family. Our special guest is the scientist Sir Gus Nossal to talk about his journey as a carer for his wife, Lynn. I'll then introduce our 3 Swinburne researchers to hear about the amazing work they're doing in dementia and technology. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the new Vice-Chancellor of Swinburne University. Professor Pascale joined Swinburne from the University of Adelaide, where she served as Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Academic Vice President for 9 years. She's a highly respected researcher of consumer behaviour and marketing communications, and she aims to position Swinburne as an innovative and creative organisation which is focused on technology. Please welcome Swinburne University Vice-Chancellor Pascale.
Thank you, Sophie, for your introduction and for being our moderator today. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which Swinburne campuses are built. I pay my respects to the elder, past, present and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across Australia, their elders, ancestors, culture and heritage. And today, as I share those words, I'm reminded of the respect that the traditional owners of this land pay to their older generations. I believe we can all learn from this, especially as we discuss the important topic of supporting those with dementia in our society and doing all we can to improve the quality of care through research, understanding, and technological advancements. I would like to welcome to this virtual event Sir Gustav Nossal, representatives from the Dicker family, our very own Swinburne Chancellor, John Pollaers, and our researchers who will share their research insights with you today. And welcome to you all, our audience on the line. Thank you for being here, albeit virtually. I certainly look forward to the time when we can be together in one room, sharing this experience and the fruit of our research more directly. Since joining the university in August, I have enjoyed getting to know the Dicker family. In 2011, the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation was established by Dr. Ian Dicker, AM, and his family to honor the memory of his late wife, Barbara. The Dicker family chose to establish their foundation with Swinburne, providing seed grants for early career researchers so they can pursue their work. Their research is focused on depression, sleep, and dementia. And dementia is our topic for today. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the Dicker family for pledging a further 5 years of funding to the university. This will help Swinburne's leading academic respond to today's challenges around brain and psychological sciences research and play an essential part in building a society that will create a better world for us all. The Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation has provided much needed seed funding for many research projects since 2011. They include a smartphone app and intervention program for young people experiencing loneliness by Dr. Michelle Lim and her research partners. Mindfulness techniques for helping people experiencing psychotic symptoms by Swinburne PhD candidate and now a postdoctoral researcher, Stephanie Louise. An app to help people with sleep difficulties by Professor Leon Sterling. And a study exploring the training of inpatient nursing staff to provide psychological care to older patients with anxiety, depression, and dementia by Professor Sunil Bar, who you will hear from today. And excitingly, Professor Bar's work on telehealth consulting through the Wellbeing Clinic for Older Adults has just this week been shortlisted for a HESTA Excellence Award. Congratulations to you and the team, Sunil. The expertise of our researchers has also been critical for older Australians during the social restrictions brought about by COVID-19. Whether it is sleep disorders, dementia, or depression, the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation supports research to improve treatment options, explore preventative measures, and ultimately find cures. We are connecting with experts around the globe and seek to form new partnerships and collaborations that will lead to answers for those affected and for their families. But there is so much more to be done. While we are learning more from the research that we are conducting, we are only scratching the surface in terms of our understanding. We must work harder and faster to be able to deliver more for those who need care today and for the next generation. We must strive to use technology to create a better world that is human-centric. We will learn more about some of the exciting research that has been conducted today and the solutions to this research is enabling. With that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tony Dicker. Dr. Dicker has been working in skin and skin cancer since 2002. He obtained his medical degree from Monash University in 1989 and completed his PhD in molecular biology of skin cancer at the University of Queensland in 2001. Dr. Dicker was appointed chair of the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation in 2019. Swinburne is most fortunate to call you one of our friends, Dr. Dicker. Thank you very much for the enormous contribution you and your family make. Over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascale. And as chairperson for the Barbara Dicker Brain Sciences Foundation, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this afternoon. My father, Ian Dicker, has always told us of the importance of education and reminds us that it was an important component of getting him to where he is today and what he has done throughout his life. All three of his children completed tertiary education, and all of his grandchildren that have finished school are either at university or have completed a tertiary program. My mother, Barbara, after whom the foundation is named, also completed tertiary studies to qualify and work as a physiotherapist. The life education that we three children and her grandchildren provided, well, that's a slightly different matter. So education has been a really important part of our family. And 10 years ago, it was a very appropriate way for us to remember our mother by setting up a philanthropic structure that would help others to learn as well. The foundation decided to focus on three areas: sleep, depression, and dementia. The topics are broad, but having this focus is good, and it helps keep us on track. They're also topics that have affected different parts of the family at different times. When things are personal, they're approached with a little bit more vigour. Our focus is research, and we have a wonderful partner in Swinburne to do this. The saying goes that if you give someone food, they eat for the day. If you teach them to farm, they can eat for life. But with research and designing better crops, the whole world can eat better. Research is not a quick return on investment. The results don't show up tomorrow on your Instagram feeds. But after 10 years, we are seeing some amazing returns, some of which are highlighted in our speakers tonight. For those of you who are thinking about philanthropy and how to do it, I can strongly recommend investing in young researchers of today and watching them grow. As I said, Swinburne has been a wonderful partner for us in these endeavours. This afternoon's focus is on one of our three pillars, dementia. It's a horrible disease, one that takes away the person. It erodes into your essence. It steals away your loved ones. We'd all love to see the magic cure, but like most of these things, the miracle overnight breakthrough is 30 years in the making. We have to chip away at the edges. And that's what research does and what our presenters are doing. So I'd like to hand you over to Sophie to introduce you to our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Tony. We appreciate your time here today and your valuable support of the university. You've heard from the Dicker family of the impact of dementia and why they're so passionate about this issue. Today, you'll meet someone who's very familiar to a lot of you. Sir Gustav Nossal is one of Australia's most influential and well-respected scientists. He was the head of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute for 35 years, and in recognition of his scientific excellence in the field of immunology, he was knighted by the Queen. He has a high school named after him, as well as the Nossal Institute for Global Health at Melbourne University. But today, he's not here to talk about his knowledge of the immune system. While science is one of his greatest loves, he's here today to talk about something much more personal. The woman who has shared his life for more than 60 years, who he calls my darling wife, Lynn. So Gus, welcome and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thanks for the plug.
So tell us about Lady Lynn. When did you start to notice that she was having some cognitive problems?
It was a very interesting thing because it was so gradual. But I was a little bit alerted and a little bit prepared because sadly her own mother suffered from dementia. And in her case, believe it or not, it started in her early 60s, which is really quite young. Whereas with Lynn, it only started at about 80 or 81. So the first few things were very subtle. For example, she found it difficult to manipulate the automatic teller machine at the bank. She found it difficult to give the correct change or to figure out, small amounts of money as she was doing shopping. And then as far as the verbal aspects is concerned, the first thing was what we might call nominal aphasia. Instead of saying, get me the cup from the table, she might say, oh, get me the thing from the thing, will you? Bit of a difficulty to find words. And then gradually over a period of probably about 5 years, her function in all respects began to deteriorate, both language and even mobility. And so poor darling, at the very end, she couldn't even walk. And in fact, the triggering point for admitting her to the nursing home was when all of a sudden one day at home, where she was already, being pretty well cared for, and people coming in 2 or 3 times a day to look after her, she just could not move. She froze. It was the most extraordinary thing. We were standing in the middle of the room, and I said, come over here, darling, sit down. She just couldn't do it. So that was the triggering point for going into the nursing home. And now she is completely unable to speak. It's difficult to know what's going on in her mind, but I think, and I can't swear to this, I think she still recognizes me. She certainly recognizes that it's someone positive, that's a positive influence. She still manages the odd smile, but really cognition is pretty well shot.
Tell us about in the early part of her disease. How were you able to maintain the relationship that you had with her in those first few years of her illness?
Well, it was a very funny thing. You adapt, and I know you'll find this difficult to believe, but we still managed to have a fair bit of fun. Now, for example, we had a very nice geriatric neurologist whom we consulted over her dementia. And on the way to the neurologist, I'd say to her, now, Lynn, he's going to ask you a lot of questions. Yes. Now, he might ask you, what country do we live in? and please you say Australia. So in we trot, and surprisingly, Dr. Woodward said, what country do we live in, Lynn? And she said, Australia. But then there was one I hadn't prepared her for. She said, and what actual city are we in now? She couldn't manage that one.
You've been a big carer for someone with dementia. What's been the biggest challenges for you being a carer for Lynn when she was at home?
Look, I think the biggest challenge by far has been to accommodate to the fact that this person is the closest thing to you in the whole world, and who, you know, you've known for 60 years, as dynamic, intelligent, very vigorous, very positive type of person, all of a sudden is becoming passive, unable to react. Very, very strange transition. And you know, there's another very funny thing. Had Lynn been in possession of even some part of her faculties, she would have rebelled against this so strongly. She would have been angry. She would have been trying to fight it. In the event, nothing at all. She accepts it quite modestly and humbly. It is probable that she doesn't really have any idea of what's happened to her.
When we spoke, you talked about dialing down the expectations that you have of the relationship and trying to still maintain a meaningful relationship with her to not upset her. Can you take us through a little bit about why that's been important for you?
Well, of course, it's been important for me not to add to her distress. And were I to start jumping up and down, bemoaning fate and saying, oh, Lynn, God, what's happened to you? Why are you like this? It couldn't possibly make things better. It could only make things worse. So I know it sounds hard to say be sensible. The sensible thing in a situation like that is just to accommodate to the new realities. I don't have the same wife that I had 3 years ago, but I do have a wife, and I do have someone that reacts to my presence, seems to be pleased to see me. Deal with the new realities as realistically as you can, and then go home and cry about it with your children.
And how have you managed to maintain the close relationship that you and Lynn have, even with COVID? What's been happening with that, and what's her mood been like?
Well, of course, with the COVID situation, we've got a new enemy. I mean, there's three things about COVID that the listeners should ponder. First of all, it's a new virus. It's come from animals into humans in Wuhan province in China quite recently, probably about last year. So there's no aspect of immunity towards it. The second thing about it does seem to be very highly infectious. It's amazing how casual the contacts may be with a COVID carrier and the new person becomes infected. That's sort of quite dangerous. And then the last thing is this virus has a very strange epidemiology. Now, most people would know that influenza, another respiratory infection, is very severe in the very young and the very old. This virus, this COVID virus, does infect children, but it doesn't make them sick. You hardly know they have it. With people, the disease is usually quite mild. Where it hits hard is in the elderly, and a surprising proportion of the deaths are in people over. So someone of my age, age 89, if I caught this thing tomorrow, I'd probably have a case fatality rate of 20%. I'd probably have a 1 in 5 chance of dying. Very unusual epidemiology.
So there's lots of research going on into COVID, which is great, and there's also lots of amazing research going on to dementia. How important is it that we invest in research into dementia, given so many Australians have it, and are also there's so many more people likely to get it in the future?
Well, having spent the whole of my professional life in medical research, won't surprise you to hear that I think medical research into dementia and its causes is enormously important, enormously important. Also enormously difficult because of the long latent period, because of the fairly ill-defined nature of the symptoms and so forth. But in fact, we've got to try. And the research, including research into preventative drugs, which eventually in the due fullness of time will come, will be very important, enormously important to support it financially as well. Look, it is going to be a very hard slog. I would much sooner and much more do research into high blood pressure. I'd much sooner do research into some form of neurological paralysis. For most of these other things, we have pretty good animal models, and we experiment extensively in animals. Now, for something like dementia, there is no animal model. So you've just got to work with the human subjects. It's very, very difficult.
So Gus, what's it been like for you having to visit Lady Lynn in a nursing home while we've been living with the COVID pandemic?
Well, I've in fact got into the habit of trotting along to Blue Cross Highgrove every day or every second day and spending not an enormous amount of time, maybe about half an hour with Lynn. Unfortunately, I can't go in, so we communicate via a glass wall. There's a big glass wall at the entrance there. They wheel her up to the glass wall in her recliner chair. I sit very close to the glass wall, and we smile and gesture, and I talk, and she mumbles, and it's a funny sort of communication. But I'll tell you what, it is quite real, and I don't do it out of a sense of duty. I do it because I want to do it. I want to do it. It maintains that connection, and I can still see, despite the shocking handicap, a little bit of the real Lynn is still there behind that face. And I just don't know, I would enormously miss not seeing her at all. So it's only 5 minutes from my place. I go every day or every second day, and we have that little bit of time together. It maintains the bonding that's now been going on since 1955.
Well, look, thank you, Sir Gus. We really appreciate your insight and your honesty. And please stay with us now for our discussion with the Swinburne researchers to hear more about their work in dementia and the work that they're doing. I'd now like to introduce the three researchers for our panel discussion, who are all focused on the issue of dementia. First up, we have Professor Jane Farmer. She's the Director of the Social Innovation Research at Swinburne University, and she's known for her contributions in rural health, innovation in health workforce and technology. She's led projects which examined older people's involvement in rural social enterprises that aim to provide basic healthcare services. And prior to Swinburne, she was Associate Pro Vice-Chancellor of Research in Science, Health and Engineering at La Trobe University. Our second researcher is Professor Sunil Barr. He's the co-director of the Wellbeing Clinic for Older Australians. This is a counselling clinic for the elderly living in residential aged care, and he runs a digital storytelling project where aged care residents can record short videos about significant moments in their lives. And during the pandemic, he scaled up a national telehealth counselling service to provide counselling to aged care residents, their families and faculty staff. Professor Nilmini Wickramasinghe is the Deputy Director of Swinburne Iverson Health Innovation Research Institute, and her research is designing and developing technology to provide patient-centred care. She's also an honorary research professor at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. She uses data and innovation in healthcare delivery to tackle challenges associated with the costs, ageing populations and demand for chronic care. So please give them all a big virtual round of applause. Let's get into our questions first with Professor Jane Farmer. And Jane, dementia research has largely been seen as a medical or a health problem. How would you like to see that changed in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie, and thanks for everyone for being here. As you pointed out, much of dementia research does come from a clinical or sort of medical problem space. And I think, having just heard from Sir Gus, I think we have a really good sort of flavour of the fact that it's obviously a very kind of social challenge as well, both for the person with dementia and the people around them. So people have to deal with the kind of time before their diagnosis, that kind of leading up to the diagnosis, and then dealing with the diagnosis itself, and dealing with the kind of practical, emotional, and social issues of living with dementia as it evolves and fluctuates. And I think a really good example of this that we found when we worked on our book around rural and remote dementia care was a woman who talked about having to drive for 2 hours to the hospital. She got her diagnosis and she had to drive back to her rural location. And all the while, having had her diagnosis, she was thinking about how her life was going to change, how she had a kind of leadership role in the community, how that was going to change over time, and how the way people regarded her in the community would also change. And other examples are around, I guess, people with younger onset dementia and looking at kind of work options as people with younger onset dementia have the diagnosis and they want to keep functioning for as long as possible. Yeah, so I think it's about thinking about the everyday with dementia and that people are more than their diagnosis. And putting ourselves in the shoes of people with dementia and their families and carers and kind of thinking about what they're having to deal with in the day-to-day.
And so what's your work shown in terms of the challenges of providing care in a rural or regional setting and how technology might be able to help?
Yeah, as you pointed out, most of my research does look at rural areas, and as probably lots of people are aware, there's quite a challenge in attracting specialist workforce in rural areas, an ongoing challenge. And another challenge about rural areas is that it can actually look like there are quite small numbers of people with dementia, but they're very sparsely spread out across big rural areas. And as a proportion of the population, they may be actually quite high. So it's difficult to provide the same kinds of services, but it's good to think about equivalent or alternative equivalent models of services. And clearly telehealth can be a really good part of this service, yes, for access to specialist clinicians, but I think also in terms of access to some of the kinds of clinics and therapy sessions, such as my colleague, I think Sunil is going to talk about shortly around reminiscence, cognitive behavioral therapy and wellbeing interventions. And so as well as these kind of telehealth, giving telehealth access to other health practitioners and specialists, I think it's important to think about telehealth as being a way for rural practitioners to have access to training and to have access to a wider kind of community of practice.
So it's a two-way street. It's not just for the person with dementia themselves, but also for people working the workforce in those areas to be upskilled and trained as well to provide the best care.
Yep.
So what's the most exciting thing that you see happening in your area of expertise in the future, and how would you and Swinburne like to be part of that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Sophie, and I think there's a lot of potential, particularly in the rural space. The way that I like to see dementia and talking about this kind of social dimension is to kind of think about the person with dementia and their carers and family as kind of at the center of a team in a place, and kind of looking at all of the aspects and assets and resources that can be built on around that person. So there are some really good examples from other countries. For example, in Austria, they take this kind of team approach and this team place-based approach, and they kind of look at working in a joint way around a person with dementia, learning together, building capacity together, planning for that person together in a dementia service center approach. And clearly technology would be part of the team also. Technology can't be a solution on its own, but it can be really helpful in the lives of people with dementia in terms of things like monitoring and alarm systems and basic help, I guess, for carers. So I think what I would really like to see is this kind of team around the person approach, place-based approach, and really looking at, I guess, the kind of work that Sunil does in that team kind of based approach in terms of looking at well-being and supporting the carer and the person with dementia in that kind of holistic way. I think it's really quite hard in rural places. Budgets have been cut and services are really struggling to get around the many demands with an aging population. So this kind of research could really help both to bolster services and build services and capacity, but really kind of raise the morale of rural practitioners, as we touched on in the last question. And look, it would really make a big difference.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Farmer. We'll come back to you in a little while. We'll just move on to our next panellist, Professor Nilmini Wickramasinghe. Can you explain to the audience your concept of a digital twin and how it can help people get the best care when they have dementia?
Thanks, Sophie, and it's a pleasure to be here with everybody today, and thank you to everyone for joining us. So the concept of the digital twin really starts from developments in Internet of Things and Industry 4.0, trying to take a physical object and identify the virtual and digital components that are critical. When we adapt that into healthcare, and particularly in the context of looking at people with dementia, what we're trying to do is identify people like a particular individual. Now, we just had a lovely shared experience from Sir Gus. And with a digital twin concept, the idea is to try and map some of those data points and identify like people and how we can. One of the points that Sir Gus raised when he was talking was that this was a very gradual process. And initially there were steps. Now, if we look at those data points and then look at another person who may be experiencing similar gradual processes to identify, is this person also going down that same trajectory with their dementia, or they're going down a different trajectory? So the first thing is with the analytics, trying to understand and identify. Once we've understood and identified, then we can incorporate a whole toolkit of digital health solutions, whether it's mobile and wireless, very smart sensors and wearables, some of the advances in augmented reality, virtual reality, or mixed reality to support the patient with dementia, the person with dementia, and their carers and family, so that together they can enjoy the highest quality of life for the longest possible time. And so that's really how the idea of the digital twin works, is to try and identify like groups of people from the data, taking multispectral data, medical data, plus other data around the social context that the individual is in, and also maybe ethnic and cultural data and preferences of that person that they like.
Yes, so how does it work in a practical sense to develop the model of that digital twin? What sort of questions, say, do you ask to get that personalised data?
Right, so it's a combination of asking people who are working with individuals with dementia to get some shared experience and lived experience, but also using our analytic tools to identify certain clinical aspects. Now, some of the work being done at Swinburne is looking at things with image analytics. So there's retinal imaging to identify how that, if you like, decays or changes over time for a person with dementia. Or some of the other data could be around hearing loss or hearing impairment, or balance and stability with walking. Again, with Sir Gus' lived experience, he talked about at one point his dear wife wasn't able to walk anymore. So it's trying to identify those key points and, in a sense, predict them in advance from the data and comparing it to other groups and clusters in that data, if I can put it that way.
And where is your research up to at the moment?
So at the moment, we're at the very early stage. So the incorporation and the use of digital twins in healthcare is at a very early stage. And what we're trying to do is develop those like clusters of people. So that's the step one, if you like, of a long trajectory on this journey.
And so let's fast track on that journey into the future. What is the ultimate goal of the work that you're doing in the digital twin, and what impact do you think it could have in the future?
So the idea is to try and develop the most personalized support for each individual that has dementia and is living with people with dementia. And the idea there, therefore, is then once you can identify the trajectory, you can then, as I was saying a little bit earlier, you can then tailor the mobile solutions to facilitate the monitoring, but they can also be non-technology solutions to Jane's point. You know, it's not all about technology. There are also people components, the social component that is also important. But it's, if you like, developing that whole palette of options to care for a particular person and support them. So the aim is really much more personalized, individualized support, but also in a very responsible way. So when we're using the technology solutions, we also have the appropriate level of privacy, of security, of digital literacy, and those sort of components as well.
And just finally, can you tell us about the Iverson Institute and the work Swinburne's doing across the health landscape a bit more broadly?
Sure. Well, the Iverson is working in a lot of areas. It's one of the 5 institutes at Swinburne, and really it collaborates. It doesn't sort of do the work in isolation. It collaborates across all the other institutes, as well as throughout all the research that's going on. So it's a virtual institute. But the focus is obviously around healthcare issues, and there are many multispectral researchers working at Iverson or with Iverson. We have astrophysicists who are working with analytics, and the example I gave a bit earlier about the retinal imaging, that's a project that is being spearheaded by some of our astrophysicists. We also have an incorporation of sensors and materials into projects around graphene flooring to help with sensing balance of an individual walking and facilitating their ability for mobility. Other projects are around nutrition and diet and trying to identify best possible diets and nutritional plans that can support individuals, people with dementia. And another concept that we're working on at the Iverson is the notion of living labs. So we can trial many different solutions in a small scenario to see which is most appropriate for each individual. And this brings in co-design and trying to incorporate user-centered design principles.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Nomini. I really appreciate it. We'll move on. We'll come back to you in a minute. We'll move on to Professor Sunil Bar. Sunil, you've been investigating psychological treatments and technology to help depression and anxiety in people with dementia. Can you take us through what impact did regular therapy sessions have on the quality of life of people with dementia?
Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone, and very nice to meet all of you. We had to challenge our existing stereotypes about the merits of psychological therapy for people with dementia. There is a belief, isn't there, in the community that if you have dementia, you're not going to be able to interact with a counselor. And there's no point. There's no point in providing talk therapy or psychological therapy to people with the diagnosis of dementia. We have learned that that stereotype is absolutely untrue. There is a lot that psychological practitioners can do. And over a period of 2 years, we ran a study to investigate just what the impact can be on people with the diagnosis of dementia who are living in residential aged care. Now, as many of you know, people don't choose to go into residential aged care until the point where they just cannot function independently in their own homes. And so often the people who live in residential aged care are there because of significant dependency needs, whether they be because of cognitive dysfunction or physical dysfunction. And so what we learned by working with people who had dementia and who were living in residential aged care is that they could benefit from psychological therapy. However, like many of the other speakers have pointed out, the therapy had to be systemic. Not only did we work with the individual with dementia, but we worked hand in hand with their families, as well as with the staff who really knew them the best. And we discovered that people with dementia could absolutely reflect on their lives. They could talk about the past in very lucid ways. They could have fun in the moment, and that the practitioners needed to be very creative in how they worked with these individuals. We saw that the people who went through our treatments were significantly less depressed, significantly less anxious, and had better quality of life than those residents who did not receive our treatments. And this occurred within a 5 to 6 month period. So we had to challenge our stereotypes going into a study, and we are learning all the time about how to be more creative and how to be more present with individuals with this diagnosis.
And talking about being creative, you're also using virtual reality to help carers and families understand what it's like for people to live with dementia. Can you talk the audience through a little bit about that work that you're doing?
Virtual reality is a phrase that I think we're all getting a little bit more used to hearing. Our kids perhaps know more about it than we do as they strap on their PlayStation goggles and immerse themselves in the world of games. However, virtual reality is now being used more and more in the healthcare industry. Not only is it being used to help people take virtual holidays where they can experience what it might be like to be at the beach or in the mountains or in their favorite place without leaving their bedside, but it's also being used to train healthcare professionals. Dementia Australia has embraced technology as a means of training the next generation of healthcare professionals. And one of the ways in which they've done this is by using virtual reality. So what they've done is they've created a virtual world that healthcare practitioners can step into to experience what it might be like to make one's way from the bedroom to the bathroom, and to experience that journey as someone with the perceptual difficulties, with the cognitive difficulties that are often associated with dementia. Because after all, what better way to instill a sense of empathy, if not by giving the individual a first person's point of view? So Dementia Australia, I think, have embarked on the next generation of training tools by using virtual reality. And we've been partnering with them to investigate the outcomes of that experience.
And staying on the theme of technology, you also were able to develop the telehealth counselling service for, as you mentioned, for aged care residents, their families and their carers. What difference did that make, given the COVID pandemic that we're all dealing with? What difference did the telehealth facility make for people who might have been feeling even more lonely and isolated because of the pandemic?
Yes, we know that the pandemic has had an enormous negative impact on the mental health of residents, staff, and their families. And one of the big difficulties the pandemic has created for all of us is the difficulty in being physically close to someone. And so previously we would send in a team of counselors or practitioners to provide psychological care, but we couldn't do that. So telehealth seemed to be the obvious solution. We had to, again, challenge our stereotypes about whether telehealth was feasible within a residential aged care population. Who would imagine someone in their 80s, 90s, and beyond who are living with multiple comorbidities, who would have imagined that they could operate via telehealth? Of course, now our stereotypes have been challenged. We have found telehealth to be absolutely feasible, very effective. People can develop a sense of rapport and a connection with their counselor via telehealth. It's made a significant level of improvement in terms of their sense of isolation and loneliness. But more than that, it's given people hope that even though practitioners can no longer visit, or at least temporarily aren't able to visit, that's no reason to stop the appointments from occurring. We have learned, however, that it can be somewhat challenging to organize those appointments. So we have to work hand in hand with the facility staff to facilitate telehealth appointments.
And I think we're going to discuss that when we move into our audience questions. But just finally, Sunil, if money was no object, and all researchers would like to hear that, and you had a blank check at Swinburne to progress your work, what would you like to do and what impact do you think it could have?
Yes, we absolutely need more research, but not research for research's sake, but research that is applied and translational into practice. There is often a 10 to 20-year gap between when researchers discover something compared to when it's applied in the field. We need funding in order to bridge that gap so that we can rapidly translate what we're finding into practice. So what that means is the funds that we receive must help us to rapidly incorporate what we're learning into the activities within a facility. And often that is referred to as translational research or applied research. So we need the funds to know how to do better therapy with individuals living with dementia in residential aged care, but then how to translate what we're finding into reality.
Excellent. Look, thank you very much, Sunil. We now might move to take some audience questions that they've sent in. We received lots of questions, but as Swinburne is a University of Technology, we're going to focus on the technology questions rather than the more medical ones. And we'll start with a question first for Professor Jane Farmer. Carers are often short on time and adopting new care technologies can be challenging, and this is something Sunil just referred to. How can care organisations support staff with adopting new technology in aged care?
Yeah, this is a great question. So yeah, as you've mentioned, carers are very short of time. They have a lot going on, and as we've talked about, COVID has exposed lots of challenges in the care system. But like, I guess I would always advocate for inclusion and co-design of all staff and end users as much as possible too when thinking about making some fundamental changes. So if you're thinking about looking at how technology can make quality of life better for people with dementia and your organization function better, then I think staff should be involved in that and engaged in those ideas from the get-go, because they understand the job inside out. And essentially, I guess what technology should be doing is freeing the carers to focus more on the relational aspects, i.e. the caring work, hence their name. So with the carers, identifying basic tasks, for example, that could be automated, or even how robots might help by providing an ongoing watching eye or a memory reminder. Carers will know how this can be fitted into the work that they do and how it could free them to do more meaningful relational work. So another reason why it's important to involve them from the get-go is that they don't think technology is going to replace them. We did a recent study with a whole lot of community NGOs looking at how to make their staff tech capable. And this showed that the biggest challenge for the system going forward is how to combine efficiency with caring, as the system simultaneously continues to experience funding challenges and the potential of new technology. I guess another thing would be professional development for care staff in technology that could also help, combined with better paying conditions for those who undertake that professional development as an incentive to undertake it. And that over time would, I guess, develop a whole new generation of tech literate caring workforce who were kind of generating ideas about how to use technology in the day-to-day.
Thank you very much. We've now got a question for Professor Nilmini Wickramasinghe. Swinburne's known for its hands-on technology approach to problem solving, but the university also runs thousands of projects for undergraduate and postgraduate students. Does the panel see any merit in forming more multidisciplinary groups to devise solutions for the needs like the ones we've been talking about with dementia?
Thanks, Sophie. And that's a very important question. Absolutely. The role for utilizing multidisciplinary groups is critical. And I think if we look at some of the developments in technology to date, we see that many of the failed, whether they're mobile apps or wearable solutions, have failed because of a lack of a multidisciplinary team in the design phase. So they have been designed with a singular sort of focus, and they're very limited and often not at all applicable. So that's a very key aspect. And I do want to say, I do think Swinburne is already moving down that path. I think that's one of the strengths of Swinburne. It is a university of technology, but it does focus on co-design, co-creation, patient-centered or people-centered design, which in addition includes this multidimensional aspect.
Thank you very much. Now we've got another question here for Professor Sunil Bar. The question was, how can we design technology which is appropriate for cultural and ethnic minority groups, particularly when we're dealing with dementia?
Yeah, technology is a great bridge, isn't it, across cultures. In fact, we found that technology allows for great versatility in its offerings. So one of the lessons we've learned from training, for example, is that by giving someone a first person's point of view, you don't have to use words in order to provide training to aged care workers from different cultural groups. However, technology can also be used with people living with dementia to give them a sense of engagement and fun. And here people can choose what resonates with their sense of identity and cultural background. There are also technology apps that help practitioners design environments for people based on their cultural heritage. And furthermore, if we think about the role of technology in helping create digital stories, that's a great way of communicating someone's cultural heritage and their background to the aged care workers who might be in charge of helping them. The difficulty isn't really about the technology, it's about educating the workforce and having a workforce who's able to work with different cultural groups. I think that's where the focus is. The technology is simply an enabler of those human connections.
And we've actually got an audience question for Sir Gus, if that's okay. So Gus, the question for you was, there's growing research into the use of and effectiveness of therapies like music therapy to stimulate people who have dementia. And the audience member was wondering, are there any therapies that you've seen useful in the nursing home where Lady Lynn is, or other therapies that you would like to see used more widely to help people with dementia?
It's funny that you should refer to music therapy, because I knew very little about this until maybe about 40 years ago. A postdoctoral fellow from the United States took me across the whole idea, and I became fascinated with the potential for music therapy in all sorts of fields. The particular apropos with this young person's patient was depression, but I could see how music therapy could play a really wonderful role for people with dementia. Music has the capacity to capture a person's mind in a non-intellectual way. It penetrates at a level different from rationality. And I think a person might be demented, but have their, as it were, emotional caliber still 100% intact. And so heads up for music therapy, give it a go. It might have a wonderful effect in this ghastly disease.
And so Gus, I'm also interested to get a bit of a reaction and response from you from hearing about the work that the researchers at Swinburne are doing, and particularly the work that they're doing with technology and dementia. What were you thinking when you were hearing them describe the exciting work that they're doing?
Well, look, I'm absolutely delighted to learn about this initiative. I'm ashamed to say I don't know a great deal about Swinburne, except I know it enjoys a wonderful reputation amongst the technical colleges. And the fact that you are so heavily engaged, so intelligently engaged, and if I might say so, so originally engaged in this field of dementia is an eye-opener to me. It's a revelation. I'd like to congratulate you on the work. I'd be fascinated to hear more about it. And let's give you a lot of hope for the decade of the 20s with all the things that you might advance and discover.
Thank you, Sir Gus, and the researchers for that fascinating discussion about the future of dementia care. We've heard today about the challenges of living and caring for someone with dementia. We've heard that dementia doesn't discriminate, it can affect any family. But it's clear from the research that these innovative new models of care that Swinburne are developing will improve the lives of patients and their carers, whether it's the digital twin or virtual reality or telehealth for regional and rural dementia patients. We've been inspired by the researchers and look forward to hearing more about their success in the future. Now it's my great pleasure to invite the Chancellor, Professor John Pollaers, to close our event.
Thank you, Sophie. Wow. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to Sir Gustav Nossal for generously sharing your experience with us today. You've made dementia real and you've made it very personal. Your reflection on staying positive and then going home to cry with the children will weigh on our minds for quite a long time. Please extend our heartfelt thanks to your darling Lynn and to your wonderful family for trusting us with your story. I'd like to also thank Professor Nilmini Wickramasinghe, to Professor Sunilbar and to Professor Jane Farmer for sharing your insights. The work you're undertaking is showing us how vital technology is to our understanding of dementia and to providing holistic care to those who need it. This topic is of personal significance to me also, through the work that I've done in chairing the Aged Care Workforce Strategy Task Force, Aged Care Advocacy, and in my own business, Leaf Independent Living Solutions, where we deal with these issues every day. We understand how critical it is to continue to advance the understanding of dementia. Indeed, understanding is key, not just of dementia, but of our collective reactions to this and to other social challenges. We all too often speak in platitudes and wishful thinking, hoping that somebody will come along and solve this problem for us. For me, the time for straight talk is now. The sad truth is that our wider community simply doesn't care enough. If it doesn't impact you, then for some reason it's not real. And we cannot wait and we cannot depend upon government to solve these issues for us. The time is now and the time is for us. But here in this virtual room, that's not the case. And because of this, in this virtual room, together we must step up. Universities have a key role to play in leading society to do what's needed to solve these problems. We have the opportunity to lead Australia to a new society, Society 5.0, where the gains of the technology age are harnessed and unleashed to solve society's challenges. It's as simple as that, and it's as large as that. We can influence both the research and the future workforce that are critical to shape our shared tomorrow. And as more than 1 million Australians will receive dementia diagnosis by 2050, this is a huge challenge in our shared tomorrow. In urging you to consider the support you can provide, I remind you of the wonderful work that we've done with the Dicker family to find a model of philanthropy that meets the objectives of the family, advances Swinburne's research, and delivers critical societal outcomes. And once again, I thank the Dicker family for their 10 years of philanthropic support. I also want to acknowledge the wonderful support of the many benefactors and philanthropic investors who are partnering with us to solve society's biggest problems, many of whom are with us tonight. Charles Good AC and the George Alexander Foundation for their generous investment in our students. Steve Graham, who has funded the Leadership Australian Leadership Index, Hearts and Minds Investments and Cooper Investors for advancing research into mental health and wellbeing, Rosemary Simpson family via the Jollymont Foundation, and David Lloyd Jones, who invested heavily in both our students and our infrastructure to support research, and both Arcare Foundation and the Aged Persons Welfare Foundation for funding the important work of Professor Sunil Bar and the National Telehealth Program. If you'd like to be part of creating our shared future, we would welcome that conversation. Our Director for Development is Belinda Collins, and Belinda would be delighted to have those discussions and find an alignment between your societal passions and our areas of research excellence. We invite your partnership to help shape our future together so that less husbands and wives go home to cry with their children. Once again, thank you deeply, Sir Gus, for sharing your family story with us. And thank you all for your support for this important work. Thank you.